If it wasn't visual clutter to me, because I just see it and I'm like, oh, tinsel, just fuck off.
Hello and welcome to Literary Canon Ball, a podcast for anyone who wants a fun and feisty conversation about books. Literary Canon Ball is inspired by the work of the Stella Count and the Vita survey that reveal the ongoing gender imbalance in the conversations we have about books. Literary Canon Ball is striving to correct some of that imbalance by talking about books written by women from around the world. I'm Kirby Fenwick and I'm joined by Neve.
I'm Neve Barney, student by day, writer editor by night, and reader by nature.
So good. And Fee.
Fee Murphy, excited to be here.
How are we feeling today? New year, new us. Not really.
Yeah. I know. Continued us.
Yeah, that's better.
He's slowly getting through this hot heat.
Oh.
I'm really not liking it.
I don't think it brings out the best in me at all. I'm a wilted flower who needs to be looked after, and yeah, I'm waiting for winter.
Yeah, I'm a winter baby. I'm definitely hanging for even autumn. Even autumn's good.
Oh, autumn is magical. Just the leaves.
But this bazillion% humidity, 60-degree days, I'm just not on board with. I'm not on board with.
Yeah. It feels like I'm swimming through the humidity, and
horrid.
I'm just not a graceful aquamarine sort of person. I'm very much a land creature.
Now we've covered the weather. So to our book for episode 9, originally published in 1989 in Mexico, Water for Chocolate is a classic of Mexican literature written by screenwriter and novelist Laura Esquivel. Have I got that correct?
I think so.
Esquivel.
Yeah.
Part cookbook, part steamy romance, part family drama, and all magic realism. Water for Chocolate tells the story of Tita, saying that correctly, the youngest daughter of the all-female Garza? I'm terrible. Family around the time of the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century. The story, which spans some 22 years, is told through 12 chapters, each of which begins with a recipe. Water for Chocolate was a #1 bestseller in Mexico for 2 years. The English translation was published in 1992, and a film was released in the same year, which we've all watched, or watched some of.
Yeah.
So that should add to the conversation. Neve, you suggested Water for Chocolate. Why did you bring it to the podcast?
Okay, well, actually, Like Water for Chocolate came to me in an interesting way. So I was reading a book called Anna and the French Kiss, which is a really cute sort of YA book, which it's actually done a huge disservice by its title because it's actually quite nice. And anyway, the point of the sort of thrust of that book is that Anna goes to a boarding school in Paris, and as she's just trying to navigate this whole new world, she's trying to navigate her classes, one of which is English, and she's looks at her book list and she's reading it, and one of the books that she reads is Like Water for Chocolate, and so she comments of like, oh my god, this is not like books I read for school before. This is really sexy. This is really cool. She mentions the scene where Gertrudis like runs to the officer and like they have sex while like galloping away on the horse.
I'm just so interested to discuss that scene because it's just...
Yeah, so like going back to like me at 14, I'm like, this book sounds interesting. Okay, cool. And so I was like, it sort of was in the back of my mind, and then maybe like I can't actually remember. I mean, it could have been a few months, it could have been like a year later. I was walking in the library and the book, like the green cover just popped out at me. I'm like, oh, great. So I borrowed it and I loved it. And so I kind of wanted to recommend it because I feel like that like initial recommendation sort of led me to sort of come back to it later. And I feel like that's how we that sort of book network of, oh yeah, I heard about that book, and then it pops up in like a really interesting way when you're not expecting it. It's like a nice little magical realism in and of itself. So
it is too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I do really like that. Those sort of conversations that you have about books as well, and then like, you know, different books pop up in those conversations or authors or what have you, and then you add them to your list, and it's just like, yeah, it's like a big spider web.
Yeah, exactly. And then books, like, and I'm a big believer of books coming into your life at the right time. Yeah.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah.
I kind of given up on so many books lately. I'm just like, ooh, what is the universe trying to tell me right now? Get outside, get some vitamin D maybe. I too read this book many years ago. I think I read it when I was 18, and it would have been the summer after high school or my first summer break at uni. And kind of similar experience, though I hadn't heard of it before. I was walking through the library, it stood out, and took it home and devoured the book and absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Lent it to my sister and she loved it. And so for the past decade or so, it's always been a book I've referred to when someone asks, oh, what's one of your favorite books? I'm like Water for Chocolate. It's amazing. It's a fantastic book. So I was quite excited to read it again.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a favorite book anymore.
Oh, no!
I know. I think I've changed as a person. I am not a fan of Pedro, who is a leading male character who causes a lot of heartache and drama, and I think he's an absolute fuckwit. And
Thank you.
I agree. I could not agree more.
He's the most selfish, inhumane individual.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I was thinking when I was reading it. I was kind of like swept away by like, ooh, tortured romance. Ooh, this is so saucy. It is quite saucy.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But he's a fucking dick.
He's fucking
terrible.
He is. Yeah, I think actually it's interesting both of us read it and loved it when we were sort of younger and possibly a bit more romantic and not as schooled in the ways of like feminism and like, you know, healthy relationships. Because there's so much in this book to love, but oh my god, Pedro is a dickhead and I cannot get behind him.
And he's abusive as well.
Absolutely.
Like, in his marriage, he absolutely ignores his wife, is cold and inhumane to her, and feels like he's superior in many respects, I think.
Yeah.
And then with the love of his life, Tita, who he can't be with because she's not allowed to get married, kind of strings her along for years and years and years.
And then, like, you know, does everything he can to sabotage her, like, possibility at long-term happiness with the doctor.
I know.
Yeah. And I had not read this book before. So this is kind of like a reverse of the I Capture the Castle situation with you, Neve. I had not read this before. And I really enjoyed it. I found it such an easy read in a lot of respects. And it was very, you kind of sunk into that world. And it was, it was an easy read. And I did really enjoy it because I really liked Tita and I really liked Gertrudis when she comes back and she's like this like member of the Revolutionary Army or something, and she's like this badass. But yeah, I really, really disliked Pedro, and then watching the film, I disliked him even more. Like his character in the film, I think is much, much worse, comes across much, much worse than what he does in the book, for sure.
Granted, I haven't finished the film, but from what I have like half an hour to go of it, I found Pedro much more palatable in that because he just popped up occasionally. He's an attractive man who stands there quietly, looking brooding, whereas in the book, the words around his actions, and you get more of Tita's in a monologue and just the anguish she's feeling. And I'm sure when they have sex for the first time, when I read that, I was like, that sounds a bit forced. It was very, like, when I read that section, I was like, it didn't seem like a very consensual scene at all, and I was quite shocked. I was like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And just the amount of silence that he inflicts upon her, where she has to keep so many secrets to protect him and his livelihood, and she's always putting herself second, which
he's not a nice character.
I found it quite troubling.
I found it really interesting that you thought didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe in the movie, it's so much of that behavior I felt was condensed in a way, and it was just. And maybe this is also because I watched the film last night, so it's much more like fresh in my mind. But in both film and book, I just didn't like him. He's not a good character.
Well, and the thing is, I could maybe get behind their relationship, but like we're not shown it because the book starts with Pedro wanting to marry Tita, and we're not shown any of the courtship. And so I feel like that would have made me a little bit more sympathetic, at least to the relationship and why they were so...
That's a really good point.
And that's why I think the film was a little bit better, because we got like some flashbacks.
I agree,
and so you were
absolutely.
able to see it as a viewer.
I did find it interesting though that his first kind of moment where he talks to her, because it's a well-off family who live on a ranch and they do quite a lot of entertaining, so that's how Pedro is introduced to the family. He comes along to dinners and things like that, and there's quite a period of time where they haven't spoken to one another. The first conversation he has with her is like, I love you, and what do you think of that? And she's like, doesn't say anything, and he is pretty much like, you either know or you don't. Love is a feeling, and demands her to answer
Isn't
him
she like
immediately.
15?
Yeah, she's quite young, and then kind of manipulates her almost into providing an answer immediately. Like, she's no time to think whether she does love him or not. Like, she has to answer him, and that power dynamic where he's in full control just really pissed me off. Even when the mother, who's Tita's mother, who's a dominating character for a long period of time, who sets out kind of specific structure and rules of Tita can't get married because she's the youngest daughter. And in that position, as part of the family history, it's her responsibility to look after the mother. So she can never get married because she has to be available for every whim. And even when later on in the story, when Tita's free of that, she's still not free at all, because that power dynamic is Pedro's in control. And there's just so much dominating of Tita the whole time that I was just so annoyed.
I know, you sort of had, Tita sort of throw off her mother's control finally. But I think her choice to stay on the ranch was more motivated by Esperanza and like stopping that and like being there for her and sort of feeling like the role of the grandmother almost for her, like how she was,
because she wanted to prevent what had happened to her happening to her niece.
So sort of like inserting her, like taking her place in that sort of matriarchal lineage. But I will agree that like I feel like the whole thing of like, oh, should I choose John or Pedro wasn't explored, because I mean she's like, oh, what should I do? And then like the next thing is December. Let's like fast forward a few decades.
Talk a little bit about that, because I felt lost a little bit sometimes when I was reading, because I knew that it happened across the span of 22 years, and I'm like, okay, cool. And then it's told like, you know, January, February, March is every chapter, and there's a recipe, and the food stuff is great, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I felt a little bit at times that it wasn't always clear where we were. It felt like, it wasn't always clear to me when I was reading where we were in time.
She
like
did a
what was going
job
on.
of anchoring
like how old are we supposed to be here? How much time has passed since the last chapter? Like that really, that was really, I really struggled with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only time with that I really struggled was probably the chapter break between like the end of November and December. But the thing is, I didn't mind as much because the whole thing is meant to be told by like Tita's sort of descendant.
Grand niece.
Niece. And so I sort of picked up like a sort of like an oral storytelling vibe of like stories woven within stories, and how, you know, if you're telling a family story, you're not going to be probably telling it from beginning to end. It's like you're telling it, and then, oh, then there's this relative who did this, and then it sort of goes back and forth because
it does follow a little bit of a
it
chronological sort of thing, but it just, there's big jumps.
Yeah,
and
exactly,
I think
and dips in and out.
Visually, I agree with Kirby. I had the same experience where it's flagged up as a certain month, and then you're having to read 3 pages in to realise that it's a decade later. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, you could have mentioned that maybe subtly in sentence 1 or 2 of the section, just to kind of ground it a little bit. Because at points I was scavenging for clues to figure out where in time we were, because those things are quite important, because suddenly there are periods of time where not a lot changes, and there's other periods of time where a tremendous amount of activity happens, and it's like, I don't know how old anyone is. I'm very confused.
That's what I struggled with. You know, because I knew that it was 22 years, and I'm reading going, how many years have passed? Well, like, are we at like year 10 now? Like, I was sort of just guessing a lot of times. And maybe you don't necessarily need that, but it's kind of helpful as a reader to feel, you know, to have that grounding, as you said, Fee, in what's happening. Can we talk about the mum?
Oh yeah, the mum.
What do we feel about the mother?
I felt like the film did a better job than the book with the mother. So the mother is quite a domineering character. She imposes a lot of law and order within her house. And she has a lot of reason behind her actions from her own backstory and what's happened to her. In the book, you discover those reasons extremely late in the piece, whereas there's subtle hints and visual cues in the film that happen a little bit earlier on that kind of soften the blow and explain a lot of things as kind of the story unfolds. So you have the information there, whereas I felt a lot of rage towards the mother because I had forgotten her backstory. I just thought, what a woman. She is cruel. And she is cruel. But she's also experienced a lot of life and a lot of grief, and she's...
Yeah, I feel quite conflicted about her because... as you say, Fee, on one hand, it's like, why are you such a horrible human being? It's your daughter and daughters, you know, like even the way she's just like, she just like dismisses Gertrudis and just like, that's it kind of thing. But then, you kind of got the sense, and you do learn a little bit of that later on, but definitely that there's more depth here. There's something else going on. There's a lot of things about her and her history and her life that we're just not privy to, that inform who she is as a person. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose this book could, in a way, sort of be a study of like intergenerational trauma and like how, like, you know, womanhood has been so repressed, and I think that's that whole dynamic between sort of repression and like acting out how you really feel is sort of like the main tension in the book. And I feel like that's why I don't mind the ending in terms of like Tita, because sort of Tita sort of brings that healing to the family by sort of taking up her place in like in the family, and sort of allowing Esperanza to marry as she wishes.
You know, it's good to have those. We need more stories of women and their relationships with each other, mothers and daughters and sisters, but you also want there to be complexity there, and you want to have unlikable mothers and unlikable daughters and just unlikable women, because that's the reality. And so I think it's important to have characters like the mother that are really complex and in many respects really unlikable, and she is like a real you know, like there's, you know, you compare her to Tita, and it's like, what a wonderful woman she is in so many respects. So it's like a really good contrast in many ways.
Yeah.
And maybe like Tita standing up to her mother is that kind of, like women pushing back against the oppression that we experience.
Yeah, and also the oppression not just from men, but how women police other women.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from both her mother and the other sister, Rosara? Yeah. Sort of that whole, that dynamic of like Rosara being like, you can't shame me, and how with Pedro, and how the concern she was with appearances as opposed to Tita, who had sort of lived her life so much in service of her mother that when she was finally broke free of that, she was so lost, and so she had to like completely try and regain herself and her own sense of who she was. And so she's just like, yeah, fuck it, I'm just gonna go for what I want now. So
what do we think of the food?
It is definitely, my memories of the book are predominantly the food. Like I had forgotten the romance and I'd forgotten Pedro completely as a character, and my main memories were the rose petals and the tears. So anytime Tita cooks, if she's in a heightened state of emotion, be that passion or heartache or longing or jealousy or rage, that's imbued in whatever dish that she's cooking. And it's magical realism because the people who eat the food experience those emotions.
Many of which were quite amusing, I have to say.
Quite amusing. And I found that definitely stood up, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The descriptions of even onions are just stunning, and chilies. So it's like all the produce and putting it together to create a meal. But it shows so much about Tita where she has no one to turn to talk about her emotions. She puts a lot of it into her food. And it is a bit of her comeuppance quite often, where she, her sister who marries the love of her life, so Tita can't be with Pedro, but her sister marries Pedro. That causes Tita a lot of anguish. And she cooks her a meal at one point, and Tita is feeling a lot of anguish and jealousy and rage towards her sister as she's cooking, and then her sister experiences horrible indigestion for the rest of her life. And I just thought, wow, there's so many wonderful ideas related to the food and such good storytelling.
And the writing around the food is so well done.
Oh, definitely.
I think that was some of my favourite parts of the entire book, was reading about the recipes, and just, that cooking process was it was really, really lovely.
Those passages sing, they are so lyrical. It makes the other parts of the book seem quite spare and lacking, if anything. I found that when I was reading this, I was like, oh, it's a bit thin in sections, like it kind of jumps forward, skips out a whole bunch of stuff, not a lot of characterization in a few bits, but when it comes to the food, the detail is always relevant, and it's beautiful descriptions, and it's really evocative. That those passages are just delicious to read, let alone the actual content sounds amazing, but everything else seems a bit kind of empty-handed.
I don't know if I think there is, because with the food, I definitely enjoyed that, but I think more for me, I really enjoyed the stories within the stories. So like the little asides about the Gertrudis' general, or how the mother, stands up to the revolutionary army.
Which doesn't happen in the film. I thought that was
that was so irritating.
Important part of the book, and I thought that really told you a lot about her as a woman. And
it
just
does
as a
happen
human
in the
being.
film.
But she doesn't in the book, she
wins. She
wins that battle, and they take a little bit, but they don't get very much, and she's very much in control of that situation. But in the film, she's not. They're and I think it's
that was pretty true to the book, to be honest.
No, there's the whole part, and I really enjoyed that.
They didn't go
part
into detail of the pig and stuff like that, but
No,
to me, when I watched that scene, I was like, it's a condensed version of what happens in the book, but I thought it was pretty accurate. And
no,
then
but
I
she
thought
gets rid of them in the book. She
she
stands
hides
there
all the stuff and then basically makes them back off.
Yeah.
Obviously the rape happens in both. But in the book she really defends.
That's a separate section though. The rape is a different incident to the house one. They're two different incidents. No, they're two different times.
Maybe I've just conflated it in my mind.
I thought it was
because the house one is when all the revolutionaries are about to invade the house and the mother stands off and she fires the gun.
They can't come into the house. They can go into the barns and the outer buildings, but they cannot step into the house. And they respect that.
Yeah. In both the book and the film.
Oh, I don't remember seeing that in the film.
I think I watched that scene pretty closely because I was concerned about all the animals involved in the filming because they drag like a sheep along and I was like, that's a real sheep. They're dragging a real sheep. That poor sheep's being injured.
Yeah, no, in the film I remember because she fires the gun and then they take the gun away from her.
Yeah, that's the scene I remember.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So
I'm really bad at watching films.
But in any case, I really liked it because it has a lot of echoes in other things I've read in history and other things I've read.
Revolution is very much, I mean, it's there, but it's not particularly overt, is it? Like it pops up a little bit in like those instances and with Gertrudis and what have you, but it's kind of simmers in the background, but it's not particularly overt in the story.
No, I think they're sort of for some plot points, maybe, and also sort of presenting one idea of masculinity that sort of Gertrudis then subverts.
I think she might be my favourite character.
Yeah, she was really bad.
Although I have to say that idea of like, you know, she's a virgin and she gets like picked up by this guy because she's running through the fields naked after. Was that after eating the rose petals?
Yeah.
And the quails? Yeah, which like, woo. You know, and in the book they're effectively having sex on the horse. I'm like, oh my God. Like I just, that must be the magic realism part. I just found that whole scene like somewhat ridiculous, but I guess it's magic realism. That's kind of what you want.
Just when you read it in the book, I'm like, wow, that's really what a scene. Didn't expect them to carry that out in the film,
and they did.
Oh yeah, they went for it. Well, I suppose like it's such an iconic scene within the book. Like, how could they not do it? I think it's better to read maybe than to actually watch in a film.
Yeah, because it goes on for quite a while.
It does go on for a while in the film. Quite very funny. But I think she's one of my favorite characters. I think because she subverts that idea and sort of takes that authority and takes that power in many respects. And she comes back to the house and she's very, very like happy with herself and in herself, and is not looking for anyone's approval or anything like that. And I just found that really, I really liked that.
I quite liked, given the era that it was written in as well, that she is, because she eats the rose petals, she's feeling an incredible amount of lust that's burning inside her, that she then gets a job in a brothel to try and work her way through that lust. And it's, she's quite practical about it. She sleeps with, it makes it seem like hundreds of men, and there's no slut shaming around that at all.
No.
In terms of her, like, sisters are fine with it. Her mum kind of has already, like, is she dead at that point? Or
I think by the
she's
time
dead by the
Gertrude comes back.
She's dead.
She is, yeah.
But there's no, like, around that section, there wasn't any shaming of her.
And even her husband, like, the man that she ends up marrying is, like, I mean, they're obviously still enamored with each other even right towards the end, which is really quite sweet. That's a really interesting sort of side part there.
And I found it quite funny that they kept putting, like, even in that relationship, he couldn't keep up with her. And it was just, I thought, she's such a great character.
That's why she's my favourite. Yeah, I really liked her.
So would you guys recommend the book?
I think I would. Yeah. I think I would probably add Would I add a little bit of a, heads up about how horrid Pedro is? I don't know. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But yeah, I think I would.
Yeah, I really liked this book. And I would recommend it. I just loved how, like, there's so much, like, how, like, just the framing of it in terms of, as you're reading it, you're reading the recipes, and therefore, like, it's as though you're sort of participating in, like, Tita's legacy and, continuing that whole knowledge. Yeah, continuing that knowledge and keeping her, like, the spirit alive. Like, I like when sort of books involve you in that way.
It did kind of feel a little bit like the grand niece is, you're just sitting around a kitchen table, obviously cooking, and she's telling you these stories. That kind of, I did kind of get a bit of a sense of that, which is nice as a reader to feel that.
Yeah, and definitely. And I feel like this is a very, like, feminine book and not apologetic about it. Like, even how the setup in terms of January and February is referencing like periodicals that were really popular with Mexican women at the time and, like, throughout history. So I feel like there's so much of this book. I mean, obviously the romance, I mean, Pedro's a dickhead.
It's problematic.
It's problematic, let's just say. But there's so much in this book to love. I feel like, it's a thumbs up.
What about you, Fee?
To be honest, I'm a little bit sad that I've reread it, because
isn't that such a shame?
It was, like, a really nice, like, I was excited to reread it, but I think the thin writing really kind of irked me, because it's, like, my memories of it are just so rich and evocative, and I definitely the strongest memories over, like, the last decade have been, like, her relationship with food and the kitchen and things like that. So I'm really pleased that stands up. But I think if because my sister hasn't reread it and it's still one of her favorite books, I would caution her to
reread it. Yeah,
to maybe not reread it and keep those memories strong.
It's always the risk that you take when you have a favorite book from childhood, or even 5 or 10 years ago. It's such a risk.
It really is
to reread it.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
That said, yeah, why not? People should read it. Like, it's a really good discussion book.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't chat about it that much when I had read it the first time. I've definitely gotten a lot out of it reading this and talking to you guys, because I mean, it is great for showing complexity of female characters and different scenarios and how females interact with one another and society and things like that. So I think a lot of the strength of Pedro being such a dickhead is quite reflective of the systems and structures that were in place at the time. So it's probably good that I hate him so much, because those systems and structures are problematic.
Yeah.
But it was more the kind of the technical aspects of it that really kind of, I'm like, it's not grounded in different time periods. Like, when you go from section to section, there are thin bits of writing that are, like, lackluster, and I think she it makes sense that she writes for the screen, because I think there's a lot of space.
That. I only found out, like, in the last few days that she was a screenwriter, and that sort of made me think, okay, did she write this book for the screen? Like, was that in her mind when she was writing this book, this could be a film?
Oh, yeah, though we should say, just to, like, it was translated by Carol Christensen and Thomas Christensen, well, at least my copy was. So,
whose names don't appear on the cover, which is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, like, translations now, the translator's name tends to appear on the cover with the writer.
Yeah, I think maybe...
Don't they, or am I imagining that?
Oh, no.
It's not always one general rule. If it's, say, someone like Elena Ferrante's translator, Anna Goldstein or Goldsmith?
I think Goldstein.
She generally, because she's got such stature in translating, her name appears on things. But
yeah. Now I say that, I think maybe I'm just mentally cataloguing my bookshelves, going, no, that's a translation that doesn't have the translator's name on it.
Yeah, I think it depends on how, like, famous the author is, how famous like the translators are.
I feel like it's a conversation that we have more often now, just as a general rule, is about the concept of translation and how that all works. I just feel like that's perhaps a conversation that is happening more and more often now than perhaps it would have been in the early 90s.
Yeah, definitely. Though, yeah, I haven't actually read much about like the translation, like sort of like Water for Chocolate in Spanish versus English, so I don't know how much of the writing it has been. But I assume like a lot of like the pacing and the sort of the richness of the language probably would translate over.
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
So three can't even speak. 3 thumbs up for like Water for Chocolate.
Well,
or 2.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2.5. Let's go with that.
Nice. Okay, to our recommendations for this month. What have we been reading and watching and listening to that we want to share? Who wants to go first? No one?
What about you go first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first. So I only have sort of one proper thing to recommend. Angela Carter's Wise Children is a book that I finished reading maybe like a week ago, and it's so good. It's so good. I'm such a fan of Angela Carter. I really love her stuff, but this one is so great. It's the story of the Chance sisters, who are dancers and performers in like the early part of the 20th century in the UK, and they do a bit of work in America as well. And their relationship with their father, who is this very wealthy and respected Shakespearean actor in the UK, who doesn't acknowledge them as being his. And his extended family, he's been married 3 times and has 3 lots of children. He has a brother who acts as like a surrogate father for the Chance sisters, and it's a very complex and convoluted kind of family tree. There's actually a description in the back of all the characters and how they're sort of related, which is useful to refer to when you get a bit stuck. But what I loved about this book was it starts with the Chance sisters receiving an invitation to their father's 100th birthday party. I think they're about 75. They share a birthday with their father, which is really cool. So it's their birthday as well. So it starts with them receiving this invitation. And then the entire book, right up until like the last couple of pages, is basically giving you the entire backstory to them and the family and like all the complex relationships and things that happened, which on the surface sounds like it would be super dull, but it's not. It is so great, and it's just, I mean, the voice of Dora, I'm like totally blanking, but I'm pretty sure it's Dora, who narrates, Dora and Nora, the twins.
Oh.
Her voice is so great. Like, she's such a great narrator. She's funny, and she's a bit like sarcastic and a bit like acidic at times, and it's, yeah, like the you know, that sort of like giving an entire book of backstory basically sounds super dull, but it's really, really not. It's really great. It's really wonderful. So I really can't recommend that one enough.
Oh wow, breaking all the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's done well. I mean, look, you can break the rules if you do it well.
Exactly.
And Angela Carter does it well.
Yeah, you can do it if you're Angela Carter.
You can do anything if you're Angela Carter. I think that's just a basic rule for life. The other thing I wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to is a project that I've been working on for the last few months. It's an audio documentary about the very first AFLW game, which was played in February last year, nearly a year to the day. That will be released at the end of January. Super exciting project that I've been working on. You can check it out at firstfridayinfebruary.com. There's a trailer up there, and so I don't know, is it silly to recommend your own things in recommendation?
Not at all. If you didn't recommend it, I would, because I listened to that trailer when I was on a tram and I almost slid off my seat. I was so excited. And the trailer only goes for a few minutes, but the amount of emotion in it, I'm not a big footy person by any stretch of the imagination, but I felt chills just listening to the women describe what football means to them and what the night means to them, and I'm so pumped to hear the whole doco because it's something special.
I should say I will not apologise for any crying. I will not apologise for tears that will happen as a result of this documentary, because I can guarantee that there will be some tears in there, absolutely. It's very much so for footy fans, but I think even for non-footy fans that can, like you, Fee, can appreciate the significance of that night. So I've said it before and I stand by it, that I will not apologise for any tears that I force on people. Okay, so that's me. Who's next?
I'll go next. Kirby, I only have one recommendation for this month because I've been a little bit slack. So my recommendation is called The Cruel Prince. It's by Holly Black, who is one of my favourite YA authors. And basically you can read any of her books and they're fabulous. You might know her because she, she wrote the Spiderwick Chronicles. So The Cruel Prince was the Jude, the main character, and the opening of the novel is this fairy sort of Duke General guy comes into her house, and she discovers that her mother was married to him, and the elder sister actually isn't biologically related to their father, but to this guy. He's really angry, and so then proceeds to kill both the parents and then take all the children to the fairy land.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna just let you know this starts hot and keeps on running.
Oh my goodness.
It's really it's just Holly Black is so great with fantasy and making it feel really grounded. There's a lot of political machinations in this book. This stuff, as with any sort of, actually a good sort of fairy book is actually a really good spy book, because you can't really trust, even though fairies in this world can't lie, it means that they're really manipulative, and so you can't really trust anyone. And so it goes to as the book progresses, it just picks up steam as events unfold, and things that you thought were true aren't. And yeah, basically I think I tweeted about this, I was reading this and there were just parts I was just holy shit, because it was so intense.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So. Is the fairy thing, do you think that might be informed a little bit by Irish mythology?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all Holly Black's sort of interpretations is very much comes from those sort of Celtic myths.
Okay,
yeah.
No, I definitely have to read it. Nice one.
Yeah.
What do you got, Fee? I can see there's a serious list happening there. This is one of my favourite parts of the month, I swear to God. I love listening to your recommendations.
I have had a very different kind of month to Kirby, in that you
haven't been making an audio documentary?
I haven't been under the pump. No, I came to a grounding halt at the end of December, having finished off a lot of writing projects and deadlines and things like that. And 2017 was an amazing writing year where I had a lot of stuff going on. And so by the time Christmas came, I fell into a puddle. And in this puddle, I wallowed around and I read quite a bit. This is only a short list of things that I managed to read. I have to say I also had long periods of time traveling during the 2-week break that I had, of planes and trains and automobiles and kind of getting around to see people. So it was quite useful for getting things done and read. But that said, before I kind of do any of the recommendations, I'm finally getting my act together, and I will be doing a recommendations kind of tiny letter thing.
Yay!
Because I do have a ridiculous list, but mainly because I forget what I read, because I kind of steam through things and I forget. So I'll be doing that, and you can find that from my website, which is feemurphywriter.com, and I'll just be doing little notes every 2 or 3 weeks of stuff that I've read and listened to.
Excellent. Can't wait. Sign me up.
So the first thing that I read was recommended by a friend, and coincidentally 2 days later somebody gave me the book for free because they had just finished reading it and they also loved it. So this book just kind of...
excellent bit of serendipity right
It was
there.
so serendipitous because I was recommended it in Sydney, and some stranger that I'd only just met gave it to me in Tamworth. So it was many miles apart, and it's called Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness by Susanna Callahan. It was released in 2012 and it went straight to the New York Times bestseller list. It's a non-fiction book about a woman who went mad for a month, and she's a journalist who works for the Post when the story starts, her real story, and she's having a lot of trouble kind of committing to things and seeing things through and meeting deadlines, and she's in her early 20s, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's your first, big professional job, there's a lot of stress and pressure. But she's just kind of blanking on things and getting really confused and being quite erratic. I think that escalates quite quickly, and she's has all these outbursts and things like that. And people are like, wow, she's having a breakdown. And it gets to the point where she becomes drastically unwell, and she gets admitted to... because she has a couple of seizures, but they don't know if they should put her in a psychiatric unit or in the seizure unit, and they make the decision to put her into the seizure unit to monitor her and figure out what's happening. And this story kind of follows what is going on with her, but she investigates her own story. So you know that she recovers from whatever this is, but she has lost an entire year of memories because she just absolutely, her brain is on fire. And her brain is kind of melting down literally from this disorder she has, and she is on the brink of death, but they pull her back and a doctor saves her through all these kind of coincidences and things like that. And it's an incredible piece of journalism because she interviews hundreds of people who are involved in her life, people who thought she was just having a breakdown from stress. She interviews all the medical staff and things like that and pieces together her own story. And she has this extremely rare condition, and I don't want to spoil too much because it's a gripping read of what is biological illness, what is caused by certain factors, versus what's seen as a woman who's young and stressed and all those kind of social pressures and things like that.
The kind of minimising of women's experiences and women's pain is...
1000%. Yeah.
That's going on my must-read list.
It's just, it's fascinating. And my next reco is by someone who I've recommended before, and I think she's one of my favorite writers now, Jhumpa Lahiri.
Nice.
And this is her debut collection of short stories, which was released in 1999, and it went on to win the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, so just a cash collection.
Fresh off the bat, whatever. It's called The Interpreter of Melodies, and this book is so evocative. I picked it up thinking, I'll just read one because I was juggling a few other books at the time, and I thought, I'll just dip in and out. I was in this book and immersed in it that I was on a flight from Melbourne to Sydney. And I was shocked that we landed in Sydney because I thought we were going to be landing in Delhi. Like, I was so in this book and all the characters that I was just like, wait, what? We're in New South Wales? I just completely was swept away by the book and the characters. Each story is a moment in time, often She explores themes of kind of characters who are disempowered by various means, whether they're too young to be responsible for themselves, or they're in a relationship where they don't have enough money to be completely responsible. So it's kind of different themes around power, interpersonal relationships, and they're quite small units of time, but they kind of really stretch, and there's space and depth to each story, that each sentence is not loaded and overwritten, but just necessary. There isn't a wasted word in any story. And for a collection of short stories with very different characters, it holds together really nicely as a collection, but each story is beautiful and unique by itself. She's such a good writer.
I'm so determined to read as much as I can of her this year. She's so high up on my list of readers to read this year.
Stunning.
Writers to read.
Writers to read. And the fact that the first book that I read of hers was the book that she wrote in Italian and had translated, and I absolutely adore that. So to read her in a language of English, which she grew up speaking English, she is a master of the written word. Just skilled, so skilled, and just fascinating. What a woman. And the last one that I'm going to recommend is a podcast, because I've been listening to quite a few podcasts of late, and this one is called Not by Accident, and it's by an Australian woman called Sophie Harper.
I seen this somewhere the other day.
Oh, it's fantastic. It is so good. It doesn't surprise me that people are talking about it, because it's the concept alone is worth talking about, but the production of this is stunning. Sophie is living in Denmark, and this is kind of under the category of personal journals, that kind of section of podcasting, where it follows her life. She's 38 years old, living in Denmark, and makes the decision that she will be a mother. And it's not going to be by accident. She decides she'll be a single mother and gets artificially inseminated, and then starts the process of becoming a mother. And she's a documentary filmmaker, so she records the entire process leading up to the insemination, the decision-making around it, all the Skype calls with her family in Australia and friends around the world, her interactions with work and the Danish authorities. And she records 5 years of her life. There's 25 episodes at the moment, so it's kind of a flash back and forward. Each episode is about 25 minutes to half an hour long. They are so stunningly stitched together of different parts of audio of her daughter. Astrid is kind of in and out, so you know she has a daughter, but the amount of tension and drama that you feel as she's going through the process of becoming pregnant. She goes into a lot of detail of her finances, which is really interesting, of the social welfare system in Europe versus Australia, what it means to be a woman she has a bit of a safety net with friends and family, but she's going alone in a lot of sections of her life. And because she knows a lot of people in the industry, she has a lot of the music scored for the audio as well.
Oh, nice.
It is so delightful and textured. Like this, it sounds amazing. Like there isn't white space in it. Not that it's cluttered or anything, but it's just so lovely to listen to. And she does a lot of these beautiful monologues where she kind of really grounds you in a moment of time of her feelings and where she's at, and then provides clips of that.
I definitely seen that somewhere on the internet in the last couple of days, and I thought, that sounds so fascinating, that entire concept. I was just like, that is going on the must-listen list at some point. Yeah.
I'm so invested in her life right now. It's just, I haven't finished all the episodes, but it's just, I raced through about 10 quite quickly, and then I thought, no, I'm not going to have any left. I need to start kind of listening to little bits and pieces.
Rationing them.
Yeah. And there's artwork for every single episode as well. If you go to the website, the Not By Accident podcast website, Each episode has a beautiful image to go with it, and it's just stunning and uplifting and stressful at times, because her life is stressful at times, and I'm like, oh my God, how are you going to do it? Oh, so yeah, highly recommend.
So putting all of your Rex and Neve's Rex for this month on my list. Yep. Lovely. Thank you for listening to Literary Canon Ball. We hope you'll tune in again next month when we'll be talking about This One Summer, which is a graphic novel, our first graphic novel, from Mariko Tamaki and Gillian Tamaki, who are Canadian
Cousins.
Cousins?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Just Googled.
Excellent. Super excited for that one, because it's a graphic novel and big fan of graphic novels. Mm-hmm. And our first Canadian writer, creator, illustrator, producer. So that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and in the meantime, if you want to continue the conversation, or if you just want to be digital friends, you can follow us on Twitter at Literary Canon Ball, on Instagram at Literary Canon Ball, or find us on Facebook. And if you have something to tell us that's a little more than 140 characters, send us an email. We love emails. We want to get more of them.
Yes, please.
At literarycannonball@gmail.com.
And make sure you check out our website at literarycannonball.com. You'll find a full wrap of the show notes, including a list of and links to our recommendations. So it makes your life a little bit easier. You just can click away. And that's literarycannonball.com.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Happy reading, everyone.
Yeah, and Happy New Year.
Yeah.
And happier audio documentary-o.
Thank you.
I'm very excited for that.
Me too. Excellent.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Is that kid shut up? Anyway, it adds to the what were you saying about the doco? The texture? It adds to the texture of the podcast when we have a kid screaming in the background, I think.
I think the birds alone is enough texture.
Yeah, the birds are good.